You know that moment when someone looks at you like you're absolutely nothing, like you're so insignificant that you don't even register as a human being. Well, that happened to me at the most exclusive charity gala in Manhattan, and what I did next shocked everyone in that room. My name is Evangeline Hartwell, and 6 months ago, I was sitting in a pristine conference room on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, wearing my usual navy blazer and pearls, taking notes while my boss, Marcus Blackwood, discussed quarterly projections with potential investors. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden shadows across the polished mahogany table. "Evangeline, could you grab us some coffee?" Marcus asked without looking up from his presentation. His tone was casual, almost dismissive, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. I nodded and stood up, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor as I made my way to the executive kitchen. As I prepared the coffee, I could hear fragments of their conversation drifting through the open door. "That's Marcus for you," one of the investors chuckled. "Always has the best support staff." His secretary there. "She's been with him for what, 3 years now?" "5," Marcus corrected. "Evangeline's incredibly efficient. Best assistant I've ever had." Assistant, secretary, support staff. These words had defined my professional identity for the past 5 years, but lately they felt like chains around my ambitions. I had an MBA from Wharton, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had been quietly contributing strategic insights to Marcus's deals for years. Yet to everyone else, I was just the woman who scheduled meetings and brought coffee. That evening, as I organized Marcus's calendar for the following week, I came across an invitation that made my heart skip. The Pemberton Foundation Annual Gala, the most prestigious charity event in New York's social calendar. It was being held at the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, and the guest list read like a who's who of Manhattan's elite. "Marcus," I called through his office door, "I've RSVP'd you for the Pemberton Gala next Saturday. Should I arrange for your usual tuxedo rental?" He looked up from his computer, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Actually, Evangeline, I was thinking, would you like to attend with me? As my date?" The question caught me completely off guard. In 5 years of working together, our relationship had been strictly professional, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed the way his eyes lingered on me sometimes, or how his smile seemed warmer when it was directed at me. Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Absolutely. You know more about my business than anyone, and frankly, I could use someone intelligent to talk to at these events. Most of the conversations are painfully superficial." That night, I went shopping for the first time in months, not for office attire or practical shoes, but for something that would make me feel beautiful. I found a stunning emerald green gown that hugged my curves perfectly and made my hazel eyes pop. The price tag made me wince, but something told me this night would be worth the investment. The following Saturday, Marcus picked me up in his black Tesla. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, and when he saw me, his eyes widened with genuine appreciation. "Evangeline, you look absolutely stunning," he said, offering me his arm. The Plaza Hotel was transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors, and the air was thick with expensive perfume and the sound of clinking champagne glasses. As we walked through the crowd, I felt like I was floating. Marcus introduced me to several people, always with the same phrase, "This is Evangeline, my secretary." Each time I watched as their expressions shifted from polite interest to dismissive acknowledgement. I was furniture to them, decorative, functional, but ultimately forgettable. The evening took a turn when we encountered Vivian Ashford, the wife of a prominent real estate developer. She was a woman in her 50s with platinum blonde hair and diamonds that could probably fund a small country. Her cold blue eyes sized me up in a single glance. "Marcus, darling," she said, air-kissing his cheeks, "I see you brought your help tonight." "This is Evangeline," Marcus said, his jaw tightening slightly. "She's my secretary." Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. How modern of you. I suppose everyone needs a date to these things." She turned to her circle of friends, all equally draped in designer gowns and condescension. "Ladies, have you met Marcus's secretary? Isn't it sweet that he brought her along?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as the women tittered behind their champagne glasses. Marcus looked uncomfortable but said nothing to defend me. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice tight with emotion. "I need to powder my nose." I fled to the ladies' room, my hands shaking as I gripped the marble sink. In the mirror, I saw a woman who looked small, diminished despite her beautiful gown. Tears threatened to spill, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not because of these people. That's when I heard them. Vivian and her friends had followed me into the bathroom, continuing their conversation as if I weren't there. "Honestly, the nerve of some people," Vivian was saying as she reapplied her lipstick. "Bringing the help to a charity gala. What's next? Inviting the cleaning lady to the Met Gala. She's probably sleeping with him," another woman added with a cruel laugh. "It's the only way someone like that gets invited to events like this." Something inside me snapped. The humiliation, the years of being overlooked, the constant dismissal of my intelligence and worth, it all came crashing down at once. But instead of breaking me, it ignited something fierce and powerful. I turned around slowly, my chin raised, my voice steady despite the fire burning in my chest. "You know what?" I said, my words cutting through their laughter like a blade. "You're absolutely right. I am just a secretary, just someone who answers phones and takes notes, just someone who's been quietly working in the background while you've all been playing your little social games." They stared at me, shocked that I had the audacity to speak. "But here's the thing about being just a secretary," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You learn things, you see things, you know things that the people you work for don't even realize you know." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you implying?" I smiled, and for the first time in 5 years, it felt like my smile had real power behind it. "I'm not implying anything. I'm simply observing that for someone who likes to judge others so harshly, you might want to be more careful about your own glass house." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, wondering what I might know, what secrets I might have stumbled upon in my years of being invisible. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, smoothing down my dress, "I believe they're about to start the auction, and I have some very interesting bids to make." As I walked out of that bathroom, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who had entered that ladies' room was someone who apologized for taking up space. The woman who left was someone who was done being invisible. But I had no idea that the events of that night would set in motion a chain of discoveries that would not only change my life forever, but would also reveal secrets that had been hidden for decades. Secrets that would make every person in that ballroom look at me very, very differently. The days following the gala felt like I was living in a strange, suspended reality. I went through the motions of my job, scheduling Marcus's meetings, answering his calls, preparing his presentations. But something fundamental had shifted. The humiliation at the plaza had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. Marcus seemed to sense the change too. He was more attentive, more considerate, as if he was trying to make up for not defending me that night. But his gestures of kindness only highlighted how invisible I had become in my own life. "Evangeline," he said on Tuesday morning, appearing at my desk with 2 cups of coffee, a reversal of our usual routine. "I wanted to apologize again for Saturday night. Vivian Ashford was completely out of line." I looked up from my computer where I had been reviewing his calendar. "It's fine, Marcus, really." "No, it's not fine," he insisted, setting the coffee down beside my keyboard. "You didn't deserve that treatment. You're brilliant, and I should have said something." His gray eyes were earnest, almost pleading. For a moment I saw past his executive facade to the man underneath, someone who genuinely cared but was trapped by the expectations of his social circle. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." But as he walked back to his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that apologies weren't enough anymore. I had spent 5 years being grateful for small kindnesses, for moments of recognition that should have been given freely. I was tired of being grateful for scraps. That afternoon, while Marcus was in a board meeting, I found myself alone in his office, organizing files for an upcoming presentation. That's when I noticed something odd. A manila folder tucked behind his desk, partially hidden by a stack of industry magazines. The folder was labeled Meridian Properties, confidential, in Marcus's handwriting. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that. But something about the way it was hidden, the way confidential was underlined twice, made my curiosity impossible to ignore. Inside were documents I had never seen before despite managing all of Marcus's files. Property deeds, financial statements, and correspondence dating back over a decade. But it was the name on the ownership documents that made my blood run cold. Hartwell Holdings, LLC, my maiden name. The name I had changed when I married briefly in my early 20s, then kept when I divorced and started over in New York. But this wasn't just a coincidence. The documents were signed by someone named Edmund Hartwell, my grandfather. My hands trembled as I read through the papers. According to these documents, Edmund Hartwell had been the original owner of the Meridian Tower, along with several other prime Manhattan properties. The dates showed that he had died 15 years ago, leaving behind a complex web of holdings and investments. But that was impossible. My grandfather had died when I was 12, and my family had always struggled financially. We lived in a small town in Ohio, and money was always tight. My parents had worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet, and I had taken out massive student loans to pay for college. There had to be some mistake. Some other Edmund Hartwell, some other family with the same name. But as I dug deeper into the documents, I found something that made my stomach drop. A photograph, black and white, tucked between the legal papers. It showed a distinguished man in a suit standing in front of what was clearly the Meridian Tower under construction. On the back, in faded ink, was written, Edmund Hartwell, 1952, breaking ground on our future. The man in the photograph had my eyes, my nose, my stubborn chin. I quickly photographed the documents with my phone, my heart pounding so hard I was sure Marcus would be able to hear it from the conference room. Just as I was putting the folder back, I heard voices in the hallway. The board meeting was ending. That evening, I went home to my small studio apartment in Brooklyn and spread the printed photos across my kitchen table. The evidence was overwhelming, but it didn't make sense. If my grandfather had owned prime Manhattan real estate, where had all the money gone? Why had my family struggled for so long? I called my mother, something I hadn't done in weeks. Mom, I need to ask you about Grandpa Edmund, I said without preamble. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Evangeline, honey, why are you asking about him now? He's been gone for so long. I found something at work, documents with his name on them. Did you know he owned property in Manhattan? The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Mom, are you there? I think we need to talk, she said finally, her voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. Can you come home this weekend? The drive to Ohio felt like it took forever. My childhood home looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling and the front porch sagging slightly. But my mother's embrace was warm and familiar, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had done my homework as a child, where my mother had struggled to balance the checkbook every month. She made tea, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was buying time. Your grandfather was a complicated man, she began, her hands wrapped around her mug. He came from nothing, worked his way up from laborer to successful businessman. He was proud of what he built, but he was also difficult. What kind of difficult? She sighed, looking older than her 63 years. He had very specific ideas about how things should be, about who deserved what. When your father and I got married, Edmund disapproved. He thought your father wasn't good enough for the family name. So he cut you off? Not exactly. He set up trusts, left instructions in his will. But there were conditions. Conditions that your father and I could never meet. Her voice grew bitter. He wanted to control us even from the grave. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of conditions? The inheritance could only be claimed by a direct descendant who had achieved certain milestones, educational achievements, professional success, and, she paused, meeting my eyes, proof that they could handle the responsibility of wealth. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Mom, are you telling me that there's still money out there? That Grandpa's estate was never settled? I'm telling you that your grandfather was a man who believed in tests. He set up a foundation, appointed trustees, created a maze of legal requirements that we could never navigate. We tried, Evangeline. We spent years trying to claim what should have been ours, but the lawyers, the requirements, the constant jumping through hoops, it broke us. I thought about the documents I had found, about Marcus's company managing properties that should have belonged to my family. Mom, who were the trustees? She stood up and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of the kitchen. From it, she pulled out a thick folder, yellowed with age. Blackwood and Associates, she said, handing me the folder. They've been managing the estate for 15 years, waiting for someone in the family to meet the requirements. Marcus's family firm. The company that had given him his start in real estate, that had made him wealthy beyond measure. They had been the guardians of my family's fortune all along. As I drove back to New York that Sunday night, my mind was racing. I wasn't just Marcus's secretary. I was the rightful heir to the fortune he had been managing. The building where I worked, the properties that had made him rich, the legacy that had been stolen from my family, it was all mine. But more than that, I finally understood why I had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as invisible. Marcus knew who I was. He had to know. And he had kept me close, kept me small, kept me grateful for scraps while he built his empire on my grandfather's foundation. The humiliation at the gala suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just social snobbery. It was a systematic effort to keep me in my place, to ensure I never realized my true worth. But now I knew, and I was done being invisible. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Marcus directly. Not yet. Instead, I would do what I had always done best. I would watch, I would learn, and I would plan. But this time, I wouldn't be planning Marcus's schedule or organizing his presentations. I would be planning my own rise from the shadows, my own moment of reckoning. And when that moment came, everyone who had ever looked through me, everyone who had ever dismissed me as just a secretary, would finally see me for who I really was, the granddaughter of Edmund Hartwell, the rightful owner of half of Manhattan's most valuable real estate, the woman who was about to turn their world upside down. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. I had to pretend that everything was normal while conducting the most important investigation of my life. During the day, I smiled at Marcus, brought him coffee, scheduled his meetings, and played the role of the perfect secretary. But at night, I transformed into someone else entirely, a woman on a mission to reclaim her family's legacy. I started by researching everything I could about Blackwood and Associates. The firm had been founded by Marcus's grandfather in 1945 and had grown into one of the most prestigious real estate management companies in Manhattan. They specialized in high-value properties and estate management, serving some of the wealthiest families in New York. But what I discovered made my blood boil. According to public records, Blackwood and Associates had been collecting substantial management fees from the Hartwell estate for 15 years. Fees that should have been going to my family, or at least should have been disclosed to us. Instead, they had been profiting from our ignorance, growing richer while we struggled. I also learned that the conditions of my grandfather's will weren't as impossible as my mother had believed. The requirements were specific but achievable: a college degree, 5 years of professional experience, and proof of financial responsibility. I had exceeded all of these qualifications years ago. The more I dug, the more I realized that my family had been deliberately kept in the dark. Letters had been sent to an old address after we moved. Phone calls had gone to disconnected numbers. It was as if someone had wanted us to disappear from the equation entirely. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed the estate's financial records through a contact I had cultivated at the probate court. The Hartwell estate wasn't just valuable, it was worth over $200 million. Properties, investments, and assets that had been growing for 15 years while I lived paycheck to paycheck. I had been sitting 3 feet away from my birthright every day for 5 years, watching the man who had stolen it from my family make decisions about my own inheritance. The revelation was so overwhelming that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to avoid breaking down at my desk. As I splashed cold water on my face, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My reflection looked different somehow, stronger, more determined. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same person who had been humiliated at the Plaza Hotel. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called in sick the next day and took the train to Boston to meet with an attorney who specialized in estate law. Catherine Winters was a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. "Miss Hartwell," she said, after reviewing the documents I had brought, "this is one of the most egregious cases of estate mismanagement I've seen in 20 years of practice. So I do have a case. You don't just have a case, you have a slam dunk. The Blackwood firm has been in clear violation of their fiduciary duty. They should have been actively seeking you out, not waiting for you to find them. And the fact that you've been working directly for them while they managed your inheritance." She shook her head in disbelief. "It's either the most incredible coincidence in legal history or something much more sinister." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. What are the odds that the granddaughter of Edmund Hartwell would end up working as a secretary for the very firm that was supposed to be managing her inheritance? Either the universe has a very twisted sense of humor, or someone has been keeping very close tabs on your family." The thought sent chills down my spine. Had Marcus known who I was when he hired me? Had this all been some elaborate scheme to keep me close and controllable? "Miss Winters, what are my options?" "We can file a lawsuit immediately, demand an accounting of all estate assets, challenge the management fees, and seek damages for the years of lost income. But I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly. The Blackwood family has a lot of power and influence in this city. They won't go down without a fight." I thought about the years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being treated like I was nothing. I thought about my parents, who had struggled and sacrificed while their daughter's inheritance sat in a bank account, growing interest for someone else's benefit. "I don't care how ugly it gets," I said. "I want what's mine." Catherine smiled, and I saw a glimpse of the fierce litigator she was known to be. "Then let's get to work." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparation. I had to provide extensive documentation of my identity, my relationship to Edmund Hartwell, and my qualifications to inherit. I had to give depositions, sign affidavits, and prepare for what Catherine warned would be a very public battle. But the hardest part was pretending that nothing had changed. I still had to show up to work every day, still had to smile at Marcus, still had to pretend that I was just his loyal secretary. The acting required was exhausting, but I forced myself to maintain the charade. I did notice that Marcus seemed more attentive than usual. He would look at me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite read, as if he was trying to figure out what had changed. During one particularly awkward moment, he asked if everything was okay at home. "You seem different lately," he said, leaning against my desk. "More focused, I guess. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I replied, not looking up from my computer. "Just trying to stay on top of everything." He nodded, but I could feel his eyes on me for several seconds before he returned to his office. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Catherine called me at work, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Evangeline, we've got them. My investigator found records of correspondence between Marcus Blackwood and your grandfather's original attorney. They knew exactly where your family was. They've been tracking you for years." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Marcus Blackwood personally intervened to prevent your family from being contacted about the inheritance. There are emails, memos, even a recorded phone conversation from 2019 where he explicitly states that it would be inconvenient for the Hartwell family to surface while he was in negotiations to purchase several of the estate properties. The room seemed to spin around me. Marcus hadn't just been managing my inheritance, he had been actively working to steal it. And he had hired me, kept me close, made me complicit in my own exploitation. There's more, Catherine continued. The investigator also found evidence that Marcus has been using estate assets as collateral for his own business ventures. He's been treating your grandfather's money like his personal piggy bank. I felt sick, not just because of the betrayal, but because of how blind I had been. All those late nights helping him with proposals, all those presentations where I had contributed ideas and insights, all those moments where I had felt like maybe, just maybe, he saw me as more than just his secretary. It had all been built on a foundation of lies. What happens now? I asked. Now we file, and we demand justice. Are you ready for this, Evangeline? Because once we start, there's no going back. I thought about the woman who had been humiliated at the Plaza Hotel, who had been dismissed as just a secretary by people who had no idea what they were talking about. I thought about my parents, who had sacrificed so much while the money that should have been theirs sat in accounts they didn't even know existed. But mostly, I thought about Marcus, who had looked me in the eye every day for 5 years while systematically stealing my family's legacy. I'm ready, I said. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents and told them everything. My mother cried when I explained what we had discovered, not just from relief, but from the vindication that they hadn't been wrong to keep trying all those years ago. Your grandfather would be proud, she said through her tears. He always said that the family name meant something, that we shouldn't let anyone make us feel small. I think he would be very proud of the woman you've become. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my mother was right. Edmund Hartwell had built his fortune from nothing, had refused to let anyone make him feel less than he was. Maybe his conditions for inheritance hadn't been about control. Maybe they had been about ensuring that whoever claimed the Hartwell legacy would be strong enough to fight for it. Tomorrow I would walk into the Meridian Tower for what would likely be the last time as Marcus Blackwood's secretary. But I wouldn't be leaving as the same woman who had been hired 5 years ago. I would be leaving as the rightful heir to one of Manhattan's greatest fortunes, armed with evidence that would destroy the man who had tried to steal it from me. And I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The morning of the filing, I woke up before my alarm. The early October sun was streaming through my studio apartment windows, casting long shadows across the legal documents spread across my kitchen table. Today was the day everything would change. I dressed carefully, choosing the same navy blazer and pearls I had worn on my first day at Blackwood and Associates 5 years ago. But this time, they felt like armor rather than a uniform. The subway ride to Manhattan felt surreal. I watched the familiar landscape of Brooklyn give way to the towering glass and steel of the financial district, knowing that this was likely the last time I would make this commute as an employee. Tomorrow I would own the building. Marcus was already in his office when I arrived, which was unusual. Typically he didn't come in until after 9, but today he was at his desk at 7:30, looking like he hadn't slept well. "Good morning," I said, setting his coffee on his desk, as I had done thousands of times before. He looked up at me with those gray eyes that had once made my heart skip, but now just made me feel cold. "Morning, Evangeline. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." My pulse quickened. Did he know? Had he somehow found out about the lawsuit? "Oh? I've been thinking about your future here. You've been such a valuable member of the team, and I think it's time we discussed a promotion, maybe moving you into a more strategic role." The irony was breathtaking. After 5 years of treating me like furniture, he was suddenly interested in my career advancement on the very day I was about to destroy his. "That's very generous of you, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Can we discuss it later? I have some paperwork to catch up on." He nodded, but I could see something in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe even suspicion. As I walked back to my desk, I wondered if some part of him sensed what was coming. At exactly 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Papers filed. It's official. Congratulations, Miss Hartwell." I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. Somewhere across the city, legal documents were being processed that would expose 15 years of fraud and restore my family's fortune. The wheels of justice were finally turning. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. At 11:30, I knocked on Marcus's office door. "Come in," he called. I walked in with a stack of documents, just as I had done countless times before. But this time, the papers weren't his quarterly reports or meeting agendas. "Marcus, I need you to look at something," I said, setting the documents on his desk. He glanced up from his computer, then down at the papers. I watched his face carefully as he read the top page, watched the exact moment when recognition dawned. The color drained from his face. "Evangeline," he said slowly, "what is this? I think you know exactly what it is." He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "Where did you get these?" "From your confidential files. The ones you thought I was too stupid to understand." His hands were shaking as he flipped through the documents. Copies of everything I had found, everything that proved his guilt. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really? Because it looks like you've been stealing from my family for 15 years. It looks like you knew exactly who I was when you hired me. It looks like you've been using me to help you manage property that belongs to me." Marcus sank back into his chair, his face gray. "Evangeline, please, let me explain." "Oh, I'd love to hear this explanation." He ran his hands through his hair, looking older than I had ever seen him. "When you applied for the job, your name flagged in our system. I knew you were Edmund's granddaughter, but I also knew your family had given up trying to claim the inheritance. I thought maybe if I kept you close, I could eventually help you understand the situation. By stealing from me, by protecting the properties. Your grandfather's will was a mess, Evangeline. The conditions were impossible to meet. Your family had disappeared. The estate was just sitting there, deteriorating. I was trying to preserve it, while taking massive management fees, while keeping it viable. Do you have any idea how much money it takes to maintain properties like these? The taxes alone." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. I know about the emails, Marcus. I know about the phone calls where you explicitly said it would be inconvenient for my family to surface. I know about you using estate assets as collateral for your own deals." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're not just a secretary, are you?" he said quietly. "I never was just a secretary. I have an MBA from Wharton. I speak 4 languages. I've been contributing to your strategies and deals for 5 years. But you never bothered to really see me, did you? You saw what you wanted to see. Someone small, someone grateful, someone who would never question you. Evangeline, please. We can work this out. I can make this right." I laughed, and the sound was sharp and bitter. "Make it right? Marcus, you've stolen over $200 million from my family. You've spent 15 years profiting from our ignorance. You humiliated me at that gala. Let people call me just a secretary while you sat on my inheritance. The gala was a mistake. I should have defended you. The gala was the least of your mistakes." I stood up, smoothing down my blazer. "I'm resigning, effective immediately. My attorney will be in touch regarding the transition of the estate properties. I believe you'll find that your services are no longer required. Evangeline, wait." He stood up too, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please don't do this. I care about you. I always have. Maybe we can find a way to work together, to build something together." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old me, the woman who had been grateful for scraps of attention, who had hoped that maybe someone would finally see her worth. But that woman was gone. "You care about me," I said. "You've had 5 years to show me that you cared. 5 years to treat me like a human being instead of a convenient tool. 5 years to tell me the truth about who I was and what I was entitled to. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself. And now you're going to face the consequences. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Marcus? The next time you see me, it won't be as your secretary. It will be as the owner of this building. And I'll be deciding whether to keep you as a tenant. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent from one life into another. As the doors opened, I stepped out into the marble-floored atrium of the Meridian Tower, my tower, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I belonged there. 6 months later, I was back at the Plaza Hotel for another charity gala, but this time, I wasn't someone's secretary. I was Evangeline Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Holdings, one of the most powerful women in Manhattan real estate. The legal battle had been fierce, but swift. Catherine had been right. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been forced to resign in disgrace, and the Blackwood firm had paid millions in damages and penalties. The story had made headlines for weeks. Secretary discovers she owns half of Manhattan, and the inheritance scandal that rocked New York real estate. But the best part wasn't the money or the properties or even the vindication. It was the look on Vivian Ashford's face when I walked into the plaza that night, wearing a custom Valentino gown and the confidence of a woman who had finally claimed her rightful place in the world. "Vivian," I said, approaching her with a smile. "How lovely to see you again." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "Evangeline, but I thought you were a secretary." "Yes, I was. But it turns out I'm also the granddaughter of Edmund Hartwell. You know, the man who built half the buildings you see from your penthouse window?" The color drained from her face. Around us, other guests were beginning to take notice, phones coming out to capture the moment. "I believe you said something about knowing one's place," I continued. "Well, I finally know mine, and it's right here at the top." As I walked away, I heard her desperate attempts to salvage the situation, to somehow spin this into something that didn't make her look like the cruel, shallow person she truly was. But it was too late. The damage was done, and everyone in that room now knew exactly who I was and what I had overcome. Later that evening, as I stood on the terrace overlooking Central Park, a young woman approached me. She was probably in her early 20s, wearing a simple black dress that looked like it had come from a department store rather than a designer boutique. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Evangeline Hartwell?" "I am. I just wanted to say thank you. I work as an assistant at a law firm, and your story, it's been all over the news. It gives me hope that maybe someday people will see me as more than just someone who answers phones." I looked at this young woman, saw myself 5 years ago in her hopeful eyes and determined posture, and felt something shift inside me. "What's your name?" I asked. "Penelope. Penelope Chen." "Well, Penelope Chen, let me tell you something. You are already more than just someone who answers phones. You just need to make sure the world knows it, too." I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. "Call me next week. I'm looking for someone to help me run the Hartwell Foundation. Someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated." Her eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely. But I should warn you, it's going to be a lot of work. We're going to be helping people who have been forgotten, overlooked, dismissed, people who deserve better than the hand they've been dealt." I would love that. Thank you so much." As she walked away, clutching my business card like it was made of gold, I realized that my story wasn't really about revenge or even justice. It was about transformation, not just my own, but the transformation of everyone who had ever been told they were just anything. The next morning, I stood in the executive office of the Meridian Tower, the office that had once belonged to Marcus Blackwood. The same floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Manhattan, but now they framed a view that belonged to me. My assistant, a brilliant young man named David Rodriguez, who had been working as a paralegal before I hired him, knocked on the door. "Miss Hartwell, the board meeting is ready to begin." "Thank you, David. I'll be right there." As I gathered my papers and prepared to walk into that boardroom as the owner rather than the note-taker, I thought about my grandfather Edmund. He had built this empire from nothing, had refused to let anyone make him feel small, and he had created conditions for his inheritance that seemed impossible at the time. But now I understood their true purpose. He hadn't wanted to control his heirs. He had wanted to ensure that whoever claimed the Hartwell legacy would be strong enough to deserve it, smart enough to protect it, and brave enough to fight for it. I had proven all of those things and more. The boardroom was filled with some of the most powerful people in New York real estate. Men and women who had probably never imagined they would be taking orders from someone who had been dismissed as just a secretary only months before. "Good morning, everyone," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin." As I opened the meeting, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished conference table. The woman staring back at me was confident, powerful, unafraid. She was someone who had fought for her place in the world and won. She was someone who would never again be invisible. And most importantly, she was someone who would make sure that no one else would be dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated on her watch. My name is Evangeline Hartwell, and this is my story. It's a story about discovering that you are so much more than what other people see. It's about fighting for what belongs to you, even when the odds seem impossible. And it's about the power that comes from finally, truly knowing your worth. They called me just a secretary at that gala 6 months ago. Now they call me one of the most powerful women in Manhattan. And that's exactly how I like it.